So I'm excited to have this conversation because our topic today is one that I feel almost everybody at one point or the other has experienced or might be experiencing. And our conversation is around how and when do I go about planning for and making a job pivot? And this is something that, I mean, I certainly, as soon as I heard the topic, I'm like, oh my goodness, I know exactly what this feels like. I know what it feels like to go through the experience of wondering what to do with this. So I feel like it's absolutely timely. There's a lot of people who are going to appreciate it. To kick us off, though, I feel that it would be helpful for us to clarify something. And it's to make a distinction between a job pivot versus a career pivot, because they can be two different things. So I want to open up with that. So Esther, maybe you can kick us off. Like, how would you help distinguish between the two?
Yeah, I believe a job pivot would be something within your own competency realm. If you are a engineer, for example, and you are a developer, whether you work for Google, whether you work for a bank, whether you work for an insurance company, a developer job pretty much is consistent by the realm of the scope of the roles and responsibilities you have as a developer. I believe a career shift in the other extreme is really taking your skills and competencies and really shifting that paradigm to another set of net new or complementary skills, responsibilities, and the scope aligned. But it is, in fact, for example, a developer shifting to that of a salesperson, or a developer changing their career altogether to shift as a news anchor. It's totally different in terms of responsibility, skills, scope.
There are skills that cross over into your career change or your role change, right? Resiliency is something that comes to mind. Problem solving is something that comes to mind. So I think that Esther is completely right in her description of the differences between the two. But there are skills that are required to be successful in any of those roles that you would choose, whether it's to change a different role or to change your career altogether.
I'll add to that is typically if you're making a career change, you're unhappy or unsatisfied with whatever you're doing, and you have a passion or something drawing you toward a completely different role, industry, function, whatever it is. So I think the drivers are also a little bit different if you're actually making a true career change.
I like that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And one thing I'd also it's good for the listeners to know is that when you're thinking about a job pivot versus a career pivot, it doesn't always mean that it has to be with another organization. Depending on the organization you work in, it could, like a lot of times, especially larger ones, give you the opportunity to have a career shift within the same organization. So you could leverage your networks and all of those things to take advantage of a passion within the same company as well. So that's something else to keep in mind as you kind of make a distinction between the two. I would love to hear from your personal experience, like your personal experience with either a career pivot or a job pivot, just to share that story. Like, what was that like for you? Why did you choose to do it?
So I've had a very linear career. It has been from just, I'll say, rising up the ranks. So every job change that I've had seemed to make sense, if you will, except for my last job change when I changed companies. And that job change, because I was with my previous company for so many years, I felt like I was going through a really bad breakup. I was going through a divorce, I say. And it's because there was a lot going on there. There's a lot of loyalty involved, at least for myself. And I made the decision to change jobs and companies at the same time. I made it for personal development, personal growth, to see, hey, what else is out there within my same skill set and core competencies, but through the lens of another firm, it was impactful because I was really leaving all that I knew. And my stretch was not from a functionality perspective, but from a culture, new company, new people, new product set, new learnings. And that was really refreshing to me.
Your driver, it sounds like, was really about growth and learning, but not just from a job specific. You're almost like, I want a different experience. Like, I want to learn like something different from another organization, culture wise. What would this look like to do it there? How about Lisa? What about you?
I think the most meaningful pivot for me was going from wanting to be an accountant, and most people don't know that, to going into a career for sales. I fell into accounting during school, and I thought for sure I was going to do it. And I started working at a Canadian magazine company. And I was bored out of my skull. I was just bored. I mean, it was great to walk to the St. Lawrence market, but I was dying.
Oh, no.
So obviously that was not for me.
Yes.
And so I kind of fell into sales. I wanted to try something different. I got into an IT company. I'm a pretty social person, I think, fairly outgoing, fairly fearless. And so I jumped into every opportunity that IT organization gave me and fell into sales. And then after that, I would say after 15 years, I made another pivot to be on the customer side of the fence. So from accounting to sales to customer. And then the second one was driven out of, and Sarah hit this at the beginning of our session, having almost a crisis to wanting to feel fulfilled in the job, wanting to feel valued in the job, wanting to, like, I started to question, what is it that the job was giving me to be able to give to my family? And I had a crisis of that, and said, like, what else can I do? And I toyed with multiple ideas, and then ended up going over to, the customer side. But it was a bit of a crisis, and it took about a year and a half for me to make that decision to pivot. And it was born out of the idea that I do need to feel as though I'm making an impact. And when I'm not making that impact, it tears at me. So I had to make a different choice.
With both your stories, but I'm curious to find out, like, how important, like, what was your self-awareness journey over the course of time to make these pivots? Because that's really what's, like, in both what you shared, that seems to come up for me.
It evolved, right? I thought for sure, the two ladies, Esther and Sarah, know me well. So I thought for sure I was going to go into teaching, and I started looking into going back to school. And it took some nurturing and some challenge from my friends who questioned me, not to be difficult, but questioned what was driving me and what would make me happy and what would I be really good at, and getting trusted opinions of those people and testing that out was part of the 1.5-year journey. And I went on multiple interviews, and I tested those candidate companies against what my objectives were, and what I knew at this age, what I know makes me happy or not happy, what I think I can bring to a team or not bring to a team, whether or not that company is going to foster the thing that grounds me in my life, which is my son. So all of those things, that takes time. Like, to make the right decision, it's not a flip of a switch. You have to be thoughtful about the decision that you're going to take, and how to be successful there, and seeking the opinions of trusted mentors and advisors and sponsors to support and to kind of validate, not for the purpose of getting permission, but really to validate, if they trust you and they know you, validate that it's the right thing and the right time to do. It took a long time. I mean, I almost kind of lost faith at one point as to whether or not it was. Sarah's laughing. Sarah's totally there.
Yes.
I almost lost faith at one time. I almost felt a little defeated. It was a very, very long journey.
Yeah.
But I think part of that journey is because I was with this one company for such a long time, and the journey with this company was long and for a long time very fulfilling, right?
Yes.
So it required a lot of thought. It required a lot of testing, and thanks to my wonderful colleagues and mentors on the phone, we were able to get through that. I say we because it's a journey for all of us.
I just want to add on to that. And Lisa, you mentioned something so important, is that it's not an overnight decision.
Right.
I probably started getting the itch a year out. And if it was a rash decision, I would have taken, say, a good day. Those negative days really outweigh the good. And I was going through a similar situation where I was like, I don't know, do I really want to leave? Am I crazy for leaving? Do I really understand why I'm unhappy? And maybe it's me, maybe it's not my situation. And you, Nancy, you mentioned self-awareness. There was a lot of self-reflection. Again, being loyal and being at a place where, again, for the majority of my time at this company, I loved my job, loved it. And so it was I call it a breakup and a divorce for a reason, because I felt like I was ending something that at one point was so special to me.
Yes.
And gave me a whole lot of fulfillment, a whole lot of money, a whole lot of excitement and happiness and so on. To that now be completely diminished, it was hard. Yes, sometimes a job change is hard.
Yes.
And yes, there is a lot of self-reflection. But with strong network and support system, like Lisa says, you'll make the right decision.
What stands out to me is the idea of alignment. Like you were, so it's not always that I hated everything. It's like you come to a point where you outgrow something and you started to realize I'm not in alignment with these values. Like, you know, Lisa, you talked about just the idea of providing impact. I may have felt that 2-3 years ago, but now at this point, I don't know if I'm continuing to provide the impact that I wanted to provide, like who I want to be. Like, so that alignment piece. So I appreciate what both of you are sharing about the conflict and the crisis that you went through in doing that. And for those listening in, like, reckon that's okay. Like, the fact that you're feeling that way and the crisis and having to battle it out, that doesn't mean something's wrong with you or that there's something wrong in your journey. It more than anything means there's something here that you need to scratch out a bit and figure out, what do I do with this? And there's, you know, just to your point, like there's a lot of different ways that you can access that. What about you, Esther? In your journey, what's like your pivot story?
Let me shift the gears here to a totally different scenario than what Lisa and Sarah has shared, because there are moments in your career where it won't be about you planning your career shift, your job shift. And this is a positive story on an oversight from what good leaders and management do for you. My journey has totally shifted because of one of the most early career decisions I had made, from moving from a technical systems engineer role to that of a consultative sales role. And it was nothing that I planned. I was having a great time at my job. I was making above average money. And my manager had decided at one point to call me in and said to me, you know, you have these skills of personable nature. You tend to rapport with your clients to a degree where it could be leveraged and optimized in different ways. So keeping client relationships being a very good capability of yours, you can extend that and expand that capability in a new type of role. And he decided at that point to start carving out the reasons for me for moving from a systems engineer role over to a sales consultative role. And as soon as he did that, all the lights and the red lights started to go on with I don't want to be that used car salesman type of
Ah,
salesperson. So the whole connotation behind salesperson, all I could think of is either retail and not to diminish any retail roles from the audience, but I just thought of this sales role being very much a commodity sales type of responsibility. And I just didn't want to be seen that way. And this is in a high-tech company. So within that context, I said, I graduated with a bachelor's of mathematics, right? And my subspecialty was business. My subspecialty was information systems. And I just couldn't see the alignment of where he was seeing my career trajectory moving on. So me having the innate negotiation skills that I believe I was born with, I said, I have no clue as to where you're leading me and why. You're telling me very positive things about where this job can lead me and where this career shift from technical to that of consultative sales can take me. However, I don't believe you. So what I'd like to do is, if you're okay with this, the quid pro quo is I stick with my current job in a 50-50 perspective. The 50% of my scope that you believe I should be doing this other job, you can give me that scope and a territory. And my salary cannot change. So normally, if the audience and Lisa and Sarah know this, as you move from a technical role to a sales consultative role, you shift on incentive plans, and the way that you get paid is different. Having said that, normally, if you go into some type of a high leverage incentive plans, there's this system called a commission plan or a bonus plan. And thus what happens is that your salary, your base salary, tends to go lower because of the higher leverage that you have. I said that will not work for me. So I do not want to take on any risk, and the upside is yours, because if I'm going to discover this whole new world and it's all positive, then I'll make the shift, but I don't want to have to compromise on any risk, both financially and from a customer relationship perspective. So I will maintain my current customer relationship with a financial institute that I was a system engineer for, and I was on site doing those consultative roles as a technician and a architect, if you will. And then half my other time would be spent in this new role. So fast forward 12 months and my first commission check comes in, and I thought HR made a mistake. So being the good person that I am, I alerted my management and said, I'm pretty sure that this 5-digit commission check, which I've never seen before, probably was incorrect. And so I alerted all my immediate management and HR staff and finance, and they told me, no, this is the way that you get paid when you're on this type of role. And the next conversation with my management is, where do I sign up 100%?
You were
So
wrong.
if I could take my personal skills and the traits that I had and not necessarily change them, but apply them in a different manner. And the upside is financial, then Bob's your uncle. The ingredient for success there wasn't necessarily my identification that I needed to move or shift in my career, but it was the best out of the best management will see the capabilities that you have and draw you to the well.
Sometimes those pivots are a gift given to you, like someone just kind of interjects into your career and says, hey, have you considered this? And I'm sure, all of us at this table can say, yeah, someone's done that for me. And I was like, not even thinking about this opportunity. And all of a sudden they see something. So the importance of having mentors, that's come up in everybody's stories, having some trusted advisors. But again, the key thing that I find with all of your stories is this awareness of what's important to you. So these are all like happy stories. I'm curious if you've ever had a situation where you decided to make a pivot, and then now in hindsight, you're like, I should I wish I hadn't.
That a negative pivot is in actuality that bad for you, because you as an individual, depending on your strengths, I would say, and it differs by the individual, could make that shift anytime that you want to some degree. So I've never had really experiences where I shifted to a role that I couldn't learn from, and that I could devise a strategy to move from there to my next journey, maybe in a shortened time cycle. But in this free world that we live in, and it differs by market, I want to be sensitive to that, because this is a Women Like Us forum for a global audience of women up and coming leaders. So I know for the reality that in some second and third world nations, it may not be as prevalent that you have choice and the freedom of moving as frequently as some people in the First Nation. However, in the first world nation, I believe we have a choice and we can make moves. And if we believe we made the incorrect move for whatever reason, then we have a choice to plan and then pivot again.
Earlier on in my career, and it's not that I made the wrong job choice. So I explored this opportunity, and we were getting close to making a decision, or the hiring manager making a decision. I had done a few interviews. I was still interested. However, the role would have forced me to do a lot of traveling to the West Coast of Canada. Not that there's anything wrong with traveling to the West Coast of Canada. It's just I wasn't sure whether that's something that I wanted to do. And it got to the point where they said, "Hey, we think we are going to offer you this position." And I remember getting a really bad feeling. And I'm a big tennis player. I remember I was in a tennis match, and I remember a thought coming through in this tennis match: "Sarah, you can't take that job." Let me tell you, it ruined my whole match, because I was sick to my stomach, because I was like, oh my gosh, there is something telling me I cannot take this job. And I knew that they were going to offer me this job. There was moving of mountains, supposedly, that was done to get me to that point.
Right.
And so I had to go in the next day and say, "I'm sorry, I don't want this job." And my manager was so mad at me. He forced me to tell the actual hiring executive, who was a gentleman from the US at the time, go into this meeting with this executive, and I had to tell him that I didn't want this job. And he was so mean to me.
Oh,
He's like,
no.
it was one of the worst experiences in my career. And I'm not trying to say this story to be afraid of any executive or afraid of getting into trouble. Well, I'm telling you this story because I should not have taken the job, and my intuition was right.
Yes.
And it's funny because that particular role on that particular team ended up getting resource actioned a year later, interestingly enough. But it was a real important lesson for me personally to say, yes, you had to go through a hard situation with someone being upset with you and you letting people down, but never sacrifice your own intuition, your own feeling for somebody else's.
Yes.
For somebody else's. And so I encourage anybody, follow your intuition, follow your gut. If you want something, go for it. If you have a bad feeling, there's a reason.
I can recall pivots where I resisted, to Esther's example when she spoke earlier about, being almost sold, the role and just not wanting to go, just not wanting to do it. And the lesson I took from that is one of the best roles I've ever had. It was exactly what I didn't want. It was exactly what I didn't need. Well, I should say it's exactly what I did need. It gave me a healthy dose of respect for a completely different industry. And it gave me a ton of flexibility to spend more time at home, to take, drop my son to school and pick him up and so forth, which I didn't have before. It made me a lot of money. And it, I would say, elevated me at a senior executive level that I didn't have that level of exposure before. But man, to get in there, I went like clawing at the ground. Like they dragged me kicking and screaming into that role. But I had one of the best times doing it. So, Esther's right. The pivot isn't always driven from yourself. And it was not a negative experience. I remember once I did leave one company for an American company. And I did 3 years in the company, pretty reasonably successful, made more money than my other company, traveled a ton. So a lot of sacrifice from that standpoint. And then I ended up leaving because I gained what I was going to gain from the company. And I really felt like the company was not moving in the direction that was important. But again, I learned a lot more independence. All of I was a little bit of a shy person, not knowing how to speak to strange people and traveling all the time. And 3 years later, I can talk to anybody off the street. I didn't have that skill before. Had I not made that pivot, I wouldn't have learned that skill. I don't have a good relationship with that company anymore. I don't speak to anybody there. It's just kind of, and experience is gone. But I did develop a ton of skill coming out of that company that I would not have developed had I not made that pivot.
Because I wanted for those listening in to kind of distinguish between the resistance of wanting to do something versus your intuition screaming at you and saying,
yes,
don't do it. And so I would really encourage it. Again, I don't know that I want to necessarily sit here and give everyone a formula around that. It is much more of a pay attention, and you will know the difference between the two. You will know the difference. And I would really encourage folks, like, hone into that. If something is like, no, like that doesn't make sense, ask yourself, why doesn't it make sense? Versus, is it that a resistance? Like that they're two different feelings. Like if you had to give the 3 core pieces of advice for anybody who is considering a shift, making a pivot, again, but whether it's job or career, based on your own experiences, what might be the 3 top things that stand out to you? So Esther, I'll start off with you.
It would be in these 3 categories of, number 1, navigate towards your North Star. Understanding what is your purpose-driven life, because I believe a job is the medium for you getting there and not the reason for why you live. So understand your North Star, and that will help you navigate your job or career pivots, because you understand what that short-term, long-term goal is and the overall purpose for your life. Secondly, we had repetitively, and also the Navigating Your Promotion episode, said what is important for us to make decisions. In this case, your job and career pivot is also doing a sanity check, vetting out with your sponsors and mentors, those people who will help vet out those internal inklings that you have as to whether or not this is a good or a bad move. But it is that ecosystem of not just your family, friends, but that business-oriented mentors and sponsors that you have that understood the shifts in your past career and the thought process that you have in terms of your North Star. And because they have repetitively heard this, they have that unbiased perspective on giving you what their thoughts are, because it's not going to hurt them or benefit them per se in your career movement. However, it is important to get that sanity check so that it's not necessarily just your personal desire that you're weighting in the highest degree. And then thirdly, I would say choose your job or your career shifts based on the new skills drive, the new challenges that you prescribe for yourself. Because I say this repetitively, whether or not I have an executive in front of me or my 10-year-old nephew, everybody has room for improvement. Nobody is perfect in this world. And thus, you need to take a look at what are the skills gaps that you have? What are those challenges that you haven't yet taken on? And is there a space now to go for that? If it's not now, then would it be in the near future? So those are the prescriptive, what I would call advice patterns that I have ongoing in my brain, what I vet through and what I think through in my shifts.
The first one I have is the grounding. It sounds very similar to Esther's North Star, and I promise you we did not share our ideas prior to this call, but obviously we think similarly. But the grounding part is the thing that you are, the thing that's motivating you. And for some people that's listening, it will be different things based on where you are in your life.
Yes.
If you are a young person just coming out of school, then the thing that might ground you is, I need a job to pay off my student loans. It's different than a young family. Like if you're part of a young family, what grounds you might be very, very different. If you are middle-aged or about to retire, what grounds you will be different in each of those phases. So find out what grounds you. And then the compounding effect of that is understanding whether or not the company and or the job enables what grounds you. Does it help you to achieve that North Star, as Esther eloquently positioned? So figure out what that alignment is. Is the job that you currently have and or that you are going for, is it an enabler for what grounds you? And then one more layer on top, because we'll do a 3-layer cake, is, do you believe in the company long term? Do you believe that that job is meaningful? So you layer on those 3 things, and then you look for the opportunities that fit into those 3 areas.
It is funny how we all sort of speak in the same way, just with our own twist on it. So my first piece of advice is, know what you want, but it's okay if you don't know. I spent a lot of time in my career not knowing what I wanted to do. There are some days when I still don't know what I want to do, and that's okay. However, if you don't know what you want, it's very possible that someone else is going to make that decision for you. So if you already know where you want to go, perfect. That's very easy to map out your plan. You may not know right now what you want to do, but in a few years, that may actually become a lot more clear. What do you like? What are you good at? What do you not like? And you start to know yourself more. And when you start to know yourself more, you'll likely figure out what it is that you want to do. And that leads me to the second piece, which is get as many experiences as you can. In your career, it's not always going to be straight up to the top. And oftentimes, the best people that do navigate a company, especially, they're spending 1.5 to 2 years in a particular role, and then they're taking on another experience and learning another side of the business. And then from there, they're going into yet another area of the business, and they're gaining more knowledge and learning more things without potentially even getting a promotion. So think about a job change not only relating to getting more money or a better title or moving up the corporate ladder, it's getting experiences, learning different things, so that when you know what you want to do, you can build on all of your different experiences, and you'll be a better contributor as a result of many different experiences. And then my final piece is just trust yourself. I'm a big fan of intuition. I trust my intuition so much. I listen to it. Again, it's however in tune you are with yourself and your mind, body, soul. Not to get so esoteric, but there is intuition for a reason. Trust it, trust your network, trust the people that only want the best for you. So whenever you are going through some sort of job change or this type of decision, lean on that, and you'll never go astray.
Nancy, you're currently the founder and CEO for Seed Leadership, which is a leadership coaching consultancy firm. Now, with that in mind, you have a history of
Yes.
a career. What I wanted to ask you on behalf of the global audience that we have there, given that Lisa, Sarah, and I all have had previous history in our careers built upon either Fortune 500 and or large corporations, and we never had the opportunity and the experience as an entrepreneur and building a business for ourselves. I wanted to ask you a few questions, if I may, which is giving a totally different point of view and starting a career as an entrepreneur. What are some of the planning and or considerations you need to take moving away from working for someone to that of working for yourself and being a leader, brewing a net new company? What does that take?
It's just the first thing that came to my mind was courage. It takes a level of courage to make a shift, and especially when you take on a lot of risk, which is what entrepreneurship involves, a lot of risk. But I have to say, so what I'm going to share is some of what I will share will sound very similar to the story that all of you have shared, because there is a theme across all of this. So when I thought courage, but I took a step back, and what came to me was the serenity prayer. You know that prayer? It's
God grant me the strength to,
yes. So it's a prayer that's used in AA and a whole bunch of 12-step programs. But I feel that really does apply for the situation, like as an entrepreneur as well. So the prayer, for anybody who doesn't know, but I'm sure everybody does, is God grant me the serenity to accept the things that I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And I found that these pieces are really important. So when you think about serenity, like for me, that's like the idea of awareness that all of you talked about, awareness and patience and calmness to accept what I can't. So there's going to be, so in each of our lives, as an entrepreneur, if you're thinking of stepping into it, you do need to take a bit of a check to say, what are the things that aren't going to change, or even for now, like they're going to stay fixed for a period of time. Like I can't fight against these things for now. So for example, let's talk the basics of expenses. Are there certain expenses in your life that for now are not going to change, and you need to find a way to meet those needs? Do you have dependents or kids, or is that going to affect your schedule, your level of flexibility, how available you can be to clients? All of those they're fixed for a period. I'm not saying they'll never change, but for a period of time, they are fixed, and they're not things you can do something about. And this is where I would add the whole idea of like North Star and everything. There's certain strengths that you bring to the table. There's certain values you have that are very core to who you are. And I feel like it's very important to know these things. And I think my journey in entrepreneurship has only highlighted that for me in a really big way. So I would say that importance of like, what's the check I need to do for what's not changing right now, and accept it and work with it. The courage to make the changes, of the things that I can make a change with. So that's, I would say, stepping out of your comfort zone. And one area that pops up for a lot of entrepreneurs, it certainly did for me, was networking. So networking, like sales, has a lot of connotations around it, right? Like around like, oh, I don't want to do that. It feels weird. But we know that to build a business, you have to make connections with people. And so how are you going to do that? So if you are somebody, and I'm only using networking as an example, there's a bunch of other things that are stepping out of your comfort zone. But how do you, like, if this is something you're not comfortable with, what would it look like for you to do this in a way that is true to who you are? I've also seen people start doing networking in a way that is so out of alignment from who they are that they're miserable at it, they're terrible at it, and then they're like, I don't want to do this. So you have to find a way of like so for me, really using the word connections versus networking, for me, that language shifts on how I how I contact people and how I choose to do it.
Love that.
And then the idea of like wisdom to know the difference was, you know, and I look at that as discernment. So there's things you control, things you can't control, things you can change, things you can't change. I looked at it as like time management, like where do I invest my time? Have I spent time on things that I shouldn't be spending time on? 100%. So I'm not even saying this is necessarily a discernment you get right away. But that was for me really important to say, you know, time is very, very valuable. As a solopreneur, you're the one, you do all of it. You're the every aspect of the business until you grow into something where you can bring people on and so on. But so your time is really valuable. So how do you use wisdom to do that? So that prayer for me has a great framework for what does it look like to at least kick things off.
From an entrepreneur perspective, I would say, is there the same mentality of fail fast in a startup as we may or may not have? And again, a lot of corporations don't believe in this theorem of fail fast and pivot, meaning don't be afraid to make mistakes because you can go into analysis paralysis. And for a startup company, it may be detrimental to the point that you had earlier, which is you're going to be just inundated with time that you're spending and may not know that you're wasting because you're trying to get everything right. What does that mean? So the question back to you is, do you believe in that fail fast theorem and pivot, and why?
I think it's become a little bit of a cliche. So for me, the language that really resonated for me was experiment. There was a phrase that somebody used, which I don't know why it just really rung true, was like, run the experiment. And somehow that language really sat well with me. And so I'm a person who likes a plan. Like, you know, what's the plan? What do I need to look at to move forward? What do the outcomes look like? And those are things that have served me very, very well throughout my career. Like I've done very well. I've been, you know, good at that. And I've been successful in the work that I've done. So I'm not someone now who's saying, don't plan. I'm not going to flip the script because I mean, that's, you can't do that as a business owner at any place. You do need a plan. But the idea of experimenting became really important. Is how do I not wait for something to be fully baked? You know, how do you like try something and see how that pans out? So that doesn't take away from the idea of thinking. So I think sometimes what happens is there's some of us, when it comes to pacing ourselves, pace differently than other people. And Esther and I have talked about that before. So you do need to find a level of staying true to who you are and running with it. A really good example for me is very, very early on. So my business has been about a year now. So it's still very much a growth and building phase. But like probably within like the first couple months of starting out, I had this great opportunity. Like it was one of those contacts, you know, when you're like, oh my gosh, like this is like a legit contact and this is going to be like a business proposal. And so this person was working for an organization that was going to go through a pretty significant organizational change, restructuring, and she needed some support around what would this look like from a people perspective and everything. So one thing I realized right away was, one, I can't do all of this myself. So when I talk about networking, like I had made a contact with somebody who was in like a similar space. And we clicked really well. And I reached out to her right away and I said, look, I have this opportunity. I'd love to partner with you. What would it look like? And so we went ahead. But what I realized early on was what this organization wanted and needed. I didn't have all of it baked. I didn't have all of the programs and I didn't have it. But I was also like, well, I can't wait because it will take me a long time to bake all of these things. Mm-hmm. And this proposal will be a moot thing at that point. So I had to put together the proposal, knowing that some of these things, I was like, I can do this. And especially if I was partnering with this person, I wouldn't be doing it myself. She has certain things as well that we could align on. I was like, I'm going to be a little bit of bake and go. And so that was a really good example for me of, it was really nerve-wracking. So I say that fully understanding the fear that goes with doing that, but like not having something specific, but you're like, oh, I got to kind of work this along the way. So yeah, it was really nerve-wracking for me, but yeah, I knew that I had to put something out there and just figure it out as I went along. And that's a big part of starting your own business.
But for the audience out there, we are going to have some subsequent episodes on what it takes to build your own business from different points of view, alongside shifting your career and in an entrepreneurship, and with different ladies in leadership around the globe. So stay tuned, and we'll give this moderation then back to you, Nancy.
We always wrap up with a few questions that you haven't really heard before. So we call them gotcha questions. So in terms of pivots, a lot of times when people think about pivoting, they're always looking at this motion, like an upward movement. And I'm curious to find out your thoughts on, could a lateral or even a downward movement be considered a pivot?
I'm always looking, as you say, for upward and slanted, but never downward or lateral. And that's just my personal mindset. And I know for a fact, having spoken to a number of colleagues and upper lines and executive sponsors and mentors, that it's not necessarily true. And so one of the things that I took into consideration in a recent pivot is a lateral one, where it's not a formal promotion, but one that would give me a lot more accountability, net new responsibilities, additional scope that would all then pile up in my CV portfolio as new learnings. And as you recall, on my 3 imperatives for patterns for pivot, the third one was extend yourself and challenge yourself. What are these new skills that you want to gain? And so making a lateral shift, I don't believe will necessarily draw you back from a career. If anything, you choose your lateral shifts and be very mindful and intentional in some cases, and you can definitely get more out of that job than where you are today, depending on what you have designed. And again, we are women that like to own our destiny. I believe in this cohort, it might be different from the external cohort, but with that in mind, we tend to want to figure out that plan. And what is missing in that gap analysis is something that we aren't afraid to say out loud and address and then go after. The other pivot downward, I can definitely talk to, which is other peers of mine who have taken a lower title, however, in larger corporations. So depending on that pivot, it's a very different perspective, and the learnings that you have potentially as a CEO or a founder of a smaller company, and you go in quote unquote downward, and I say quote unquote because it's not necessarily downward. It may be that you're taking a downward cycle on a title. However, your breadth and scope and responsibilities and accountabilities for a larger Fortune 500 company, if you were to make that shift, is that much more expanded. And so the type of learnings you have there will definitely be different from that of a self-made company, and there's different challenges in that organization. So I would just say lateral and that definitive downward trend of pivots is not necessarily a bad thing at all.
Taking a downward, as in a smaller job, smaller company, smaller or a different title, might be perfectly fine. It might be exactly what you need in order to enable what you want out of your life, in order for you to be successful. So the downward change, or the downward pivot, is really dependent on your perspective of where you are in life and what you want out of life. You're grounded in what's driving you and whether or not that company enables that.
Yeah.
You may take a pay cut because that pay cut allows you to go back to school and get your MBA. You see my point, right?
Yeah.
You may take a pay cut because you can't have a life. Is this concept of working to live versus living to work, right? If you find that your entire day is work, and there is no time for life, then you may want to take a pivot. And that pivot shouldn't be perceived as a reduction or a decline, because it is not in line with where you want to be.
One more question then I'll pose out to their group. Can there be too many pivots? Is there such a thing as that?
It's an interesting question and an interesting concept. Too many pivots. Can you learn too much? I'm going to say, no, you shouldn't feel like changing jobs too many times is a detriment to you, so long as it's working for you, you're enjoying what you're doing, you feel some sense of control, that's what you want to do, then great. I've seen hiring managers judge resumes, and in my opinion, unfairly, for what they would perceive as disjointed movements. So movements that maybe are too frequent. Let's say you change jobs and companies every year. Let's say you then take a year off. There are certain hiring managers that are going to look at that in a very, I'll call it old school way, that says, oh, this person can't make up their mind. They're not reliable. They are going to quit. They are going to want to move in 6 months, and I need someone that's going to be committed for 2 years. So just be careful that although it may be good for yourself, when it comes to other people commenting or being in control of your destiny or your next job move, just have a good answer. Have a good answer for that and frame it in such a way that you're, a lifelong learner, because no one can take that away from you. But just balance that there. Again, you may need to temper that with a hiring manager that may question why you would be taking so many pivots.
Great conversation. I feel like there was so much meat that was brought in today. And I want to thank all of you for being here. I want to thank everyone who has taken the time to listen in as well. And I would encourage you, if you enjoyed what you heard, make a comment, like share something in the comments below. Let us know if there's anything that you feel you wish we had talked about, any additional questions, you can add that in the comments too. And that gives us an idea for what are the things you'd want us to discuss in the future. And also share this with folks that you feel would really find value. So if you find value in this, share it with others who are similar to you or would see value in this. And stay tuned for another episode that we'll have coming up soon. And with that, Esther, Lisa, Sarah, thank you again for a wonderful conversation.
Thank you.
Rating. See you soon, ladies.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.